that up. Okay. Everybody seeing the PowerPoint screen okay? Okay, perfect, good. So I am going to be providing a didactic today on social environment, daily hassles, and resilience in FEP. And I have to share that this has been my topic for some time. And as I was preparing for this didactic today, I was quick to realize my own discomfort in some of the material and some of what I was reading. And as I was talking this through with my family, talking through with them my discomfort, I was telling them, you know, I didn't feel like I was the right person to be talking about this. I shared, you know, how it's difficult for me to relate to the topic because of my journey, my background, and I think specifically being a white man presented some discomfort for me in reading it. So my daughter, in you know her infinite wisdom as a 12-year-old, says to me, you know, Dad, just because it's uncomfortable for you doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about it. And so I think that's one of my goals for the didactic today, is to take a topic that unfortunately can create some discomfort for people, but it is important for our work with participants in a CSC for FEP program to think about how every participant's journey is different and how to form that alliance and partnership with them, taking into consideration a lot of the things that our participants have encountered over the course of their lifetime. And coming back to that infinite wisdom of my 12-year-old daughter, you know, just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about it. So that's going to be like my motto for our didactic today. So to start off, I want everybody to take just a brief couple of minutes. I want you to think about a time when you were experiencing a challenge or a difficulty professionally with your work, and maybe you went to a supervisor or manager to talk to them about it. And so as you're thinking about that, I want you to think about how you felt before you had the discussion. Think about how you were feeling while you were having the discussion, so while the interaction was going on, and then how you felt when you left the meeting or the discussion that you were having. So I want you to think about those things just real briefly. We'll come back to it later, but I want everybody to think about really how they were feeling. What were some of their emotions that they were going through at that time? Okay. So here are our objectives today. We're going to talk a little bit about resilience and its role in FEP program. And we're going to talk about social determinants of health a little bit. And we're going to kind of tie them together and looking at the impact of social determinants of health and how they have an impact on resilience for the participants that we work with in our CSC for FEP programming. So we're going to start off and we're going to define resilience. Now, resilience has always been a major part of CSC for FEP programming. You know, the idea being as individuals are early in their treatment, early in their symptomology, you know, promoting resilience frequently, you know, to help them get back to where they were before engaging in programming, right? So the idea is get back on track or get back to where their life was before. And the idea was so that this would improve the long-term outcome for participants. So the idea that they engage in CSC for FEP programming and they maybe are able to get back to work, or they may be able to get their own place to live, and a lot of those positive things that can occur. The idea being that they wouldn't necessarily need to be involved in treatment services for the rest of their life, or even for an extended period of time. So the idea was to promote that resilience often and frequently in the CSC for FEP programming. And resiliency is often viewed as a trait, right? So if you've ever found yourself or you've ever heard anybody ever say, they just aren't very resilient, that's an example of resilience being viewed as a trait, that it's either something that an individual has or something that they do not have. And also, it really has become a go-to solution for a wide range of topics and aspects of individuals' lives. The idea of talking about resilience, promoting resilience, they're resilient, they're not resilient. It really has become the go-to. If they just tried a little bit harder, or they just worked a little bit harder. So one of the things that we want to think about is that we want to change the way we think about resilience. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about, taking into account both internal and external factors when we talk about resilience, and when individuals are maybe experiencing some difficulties or some challenges with regard to resilience. And thinking about when an individual or families encounter challenges, their responses could vary, because we want to think about resilience being on a continuum as opposed to a trait. So it's not something that a person possesses or doesn't possess, but circumstances, situations internally and externally can factor into a response to specific challenges for individuals. So we want to keep that in mind. Think about the way that we approach resilience with the participants that we work with. One of the other ways to hopefully change our mindset a little bit with resilience is to think about the conditions or the situations that are the people we work with and what they are confronted with on a daily basis, right? And so if we just nonstop continue to promote resilience, if we continue to say, just keep working, it'll work out, just keep trying, keep doing this, keep doing that, without addressing those hardships and those conditions that they're confronted with on a daily basis, then we're really only doing half of the process. we're doing an inadequate service at that point. So we have to recognize that it's not just working with the participants that we're sitting with, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit as well, but it's also looking at how can we be an ally? How can we help to promote and advocate for change in bigger systemic issues that can deter resilience for individuals that we're working with? So again, with social determinants of health, and I apologize, this might be a review for most of you, but we want to look at some of those, any environmental, societal, structural factors that affect any type of incidence, prevalence, or prognosis of disease. And we also want to take into account health inequities as well. Now, when we talk about social determinants of health, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that it can influence the onset. And if we talk about psychosis specifically, social determinants of health can influence the onset of psychosis for those that are at risk. And it can worsen conditions associated with schizophrenia spectrum disorder. So one of the things to think about is that, the last bullet here, it highlights early life adversity contribute to increased incidence of schizophrenia spectrum diagnoses, but homelessness, incarceration can worsen the psychopathology that individuals may experience. And so we want to think about social determinants of health that they can influence, but it's not the cause. They're not, that in and of itself is not the cause of any type of mental illness. Okay. So I want to talk briefly about what can we do next. Okay. And so when we think about resilience and when we're meeting with participants that we're working with, and Rosenberg and colleagues had some good ideas about how to approach resilience on an individual level. And they said one place to start is by helping participants identify their own resilience and the resilience that they've displayed, because it not only acknowledges the effort that they've made, but it also helps to kind of bring to the forefront what were some of the situations, conditions, et cetera, that brought about the need for the participant to be resilient in the first place. So it can kind of shed light on some of those. And when we're talking with participants, just like every participant's journey is different, this response is going to be very different. And Rosenberg and colleagues highlighted a couple. So if you think about African-American population and racism and what they encounter, you think of LGBTQ youth, considering suicide because maybe they live in a home that is non-affirming. Migrant populations that have been displaced and separated from their families. The Asian population that were continuously threatened during the COVID pandemic. Jewish population, seeing a resurgence of anti-Semitic hate crime. So the list can really go on, and we recognize that all of those have their own unique resilience journey and how individuals have been able to, or how in the past, they were able to utilize resilience in their journey is important. There's going to be differences. Everybody is not the same. We can't put everybody in the same process or think that everybody's resilience is exactly the same. The other thing is thinking about how we can really, truly create and provide safe spaces for the people that we work with. Not just saying that we do it, not just putting stickers up on our doors or stickers up on our windows or, having something that we can, share with people. Oh, our agency does this or our agency does that. But how do we really provide those safe spaces? Do we acknowledge and talk about the barriers that have been created due to systemic racism? And do we do our homework? If we're talking about something, do we come to those encounters with the knowledge that we need to in order to help facilitate growth with individuals? I put this first bullet on here because I truly, again, in the course of gathering this information, it shouldn't feel overwhelming. Maybe it would for some of us, and I certainly think it can feel overwhelming, but it can also be a way for us to approach, this is how we can best serve the individuals that we're working with. And that can maybe help us to not feel overwhelmed or maybe overburdened in some circumstances. There's a lot on this slide, and you're going to get the PowerPoint's going to be sent out to everybody. But this comes back to when we're talking about resilience with participants, we want to take into account both internal and external factors, right? And so some of the external factors are going to be things that are outside of the participant's control that they can't necessarily do anything about themselves. But you want to think about, maybe for yourself, think about any times that you've maybe said, oh, if they would only just try a little bit harder, they could do so much more. And I know for myself, I have probably said that more than I would like to admit that I have. But some of that, what we would perceive as inactivity, may just be due to the individual's exhaustion from continuously and constantly having to deal with the challenges and having to continuously be resilient in every aspect of their life. And so something that I think this diagram does nicely is it looks at how all of these internal and external factors are interrelated with each other, and how we can't just say, oh, well, we can help Billy develop coping skills and then he'll be resilient. That may help, but there's a lot of other areas in Billy's life, both internally and externally, that we need to take into account. Okay. Then when we think about things from a societal level, I put advocacy down here, and I heard someone recently say, most people think of advocacy, right? And you're walking along and you're carrying a sign, and that may be the case. That's a good way to advocate. But there's also other things that we can do. We can advocate within our teams or our agencies that we work with, advocating for change, advocating for ways to help support the growth of the participants that we work with. And more importantly, supporting discussions and learning from the topics that are difficult to hear sometimes, and being able to incorporate that in our relationships with individuals that we work with. So lastly, we're going to come back to where we started from. And so I want everybody to think about that time that you went to the supervisor, or you went to your manager, and you were talking about a difficulty that you were having with your work related. And so going into the meeting, did you feel scared? Did you feel inadequate? Did you feel ashamed, embarrassed? During the meeting, did you feel supported? Did you feel dismissed? Did you feel like you were getting, like, oh, it'll be okay, kind of getting the tap on the top of your head, like it'll be okay? And then after the meeting, when you walked out, did you feel optimistic, or did you feel deflated? Like, oh, that wasn't the way I envisioned that it was going to go. And so to kind of relate it to this topic of resilience on a much smaller level, I've heard from individuals that have had these types of conversations, and oftentimes the feedback is, oh, you need to work harder, or you need to structure your time better, or the favorite is, oh, it's just the way that it is. That's just the way it's done. And so if you've ever had that experience, and especially if a month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, you're feeling the same challenge, and what your response is based on this initial experience, on a smaller degree, you're seeing what happens when resilience is encouraged, but we're not addressing the bigger systemic issues and the bigger systemic challenges that need to occur. And so for most of us, our work is just a fraction of our lives, and it's only a part of who we are. And so I say it's on a smaller degree, because think about the participants that we work with that have to encounter these types of challenges and hardships in every walk of life, and how it's easy to say, oh, they just need to be resilient. Well, you know what? Maybe they're sick of being resilient, and maybe they're tired of being resilient. And if we continue to reinforce the idea of, oh, just be resilient, you can get through it, just keep working hard, we're completely dismissing all of the experiences that the individuals had up to that point in their life. And so, again, I hope that in this PowerPoint will be sent out to everybody. And so there's some references and other information on here. But hopefully, this helped to promote some thought for everybody and some thinking. That was my goal here today. So hopefully that had happened. And thank you.